Welcome back into the play-by-play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where, like Dan Orlovsky, we have options. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That over there is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. We're back. The Super Bowl is in the rearview mirror. We will be looking ahead to the offseason in terms of NFL media. Adam Silver, NBA commissioner, doing some damage control. But first, let's get right to the big game, Ben. Fox's broadcast of the Super Bowl, a blowout win of proportions that once I went back and looked, I realized are very familiar to Fox. They had the Seahawks-Broncos Super Bowl, which was probably the last bad game of this caliber that we got, which was like a decade ago, but it was Aikman and Buck, and then they are served up another game that was over at halftime and did not provide much in the way of fodder for the superstar game analyst that we have been obsessed with here on the podcast all year, which is Tom Brady. You wrote about Brady's Super Bowl performance. You've written a bunch about him periodically throughout the season, Ben. What did this feel like as a capstone to probably the most heavily scrutinized color commentator year that we've ever had, and one that, again, ended in kind of a whisper as the game goes?
It felt like confirmation that he's not ready for this. And by this, I mean the top booth for Fox, for the NFL calling the Super Bowl. He's just not there. And it's kind of funny because at times this season, I joked in one of my columns, I've felt like John Kerry flip-flopping so often on, is he good? Is he getting there? Is he improving? And I think we've seen that throughout the season. Like, I think most people thought his debut calling Browns Cowboys was pretty underwhelming. Then he had some high marks during the regular season, kind of seemed to hit his stride heading into the Super Bowl. But I knew my assignment was to review Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. And so you go into the Super Bowl, like having that ear, like you're kind of listening for anecdotes. You're kind of just like you're paying extra attention to how he's doing. And through like the first quarter and a half, like I got nothing. Like he's just kind of there. Like you wouldn't know him from the average broadcaster calling, the number 4 Big Ten game on the Big Ten Network on a random Saturday. And that's fine. He's not going to trip over himself. He's not going to make a mistake. He's not going to make a blunder. But like, is that what you're paying $375 million for? Is that who you want in the booth? Is somebody who's just there and all he's really bringing to the table is his name value? And so I thought it was a underwhelming Super Bowl for Tom Brady. The game obviously didn't help, but even before the game was out of hand, a lot of my primary criticisms had kind of been established. And I just don't think Fox ever found its footing with this. I don't think he was ready for the top booth. And it's going to be interesting to see where this moves forward with everyone kind of pot committed to him returning to year 2 as the number 1 overall analyst for Fox and by the fact, the NFL.
Yeah, the more I thought about Brady and the year and the game and everything else, I actually think like our conversations in your articles, like the through line that I pull from it that feels real to me, feels accurate to me on his season is it. I can clearly see it. It is that he meets the moment of the game that's there, right? Like that first game, the Cowboys-Browns game, was terrible. And it was a bad one for him to start with because it was a blowout and he was awkward and clumsy and everything else. And then, I think the best game that I felt like he called was somewhat of a blowout, but at least a surprising result, which was that Commanders-Lions game. That felt to me like his best one. And there were some others where I think he kind of rose to the occasion along the way and had some better, viral moments and things like that. But I actually think, like, big picture, zooming out, having some distance from it, like, this is exactly why Fox brought Tom Brady in. And it was kind of my complaint with the whole conflict of interest thing, where my problem with it was that the whole thing of bringing Tom Brady in is the name recognition, is the baggage in a good way, like the extra aura that he brings to the broadcast booth. And so Right now, that aura includes him being a Raiders owner. You can't shy away from that, right? Like, that has to be part of it. But if you kind of fast forward it to the Super Bowl, they had him on constantly, not even just at the game. They had him on throughout the pregame festivities. They had him on the herd on Friday. They had him, doing photo ops and everything else throughout the week. And Fox does big game. That's their reputation. They do big games. They bring the size of that moment. And so it doesn't feel like a coincidence or a surprise that their signature broadcaster would kind of be part and parcel of that philosophy, which is we are here. And even on their pregame show, like, they're old guys now, but their cast is way more famous than CBS or even ESPN's is. It's Terry Bradshaw, it's Jimmy Johnson, it's Michael Strahan. Those people are famous people. You watch it because you know who they are. The same thing could be said for Brady. And so it kind of just actually clicked for me at a certain point where I was like, oh, this is the point. And especially in an industry where we kind of know that whoever's sitting there doesn't affect, like, people tuning in. It doesn't affect, and it's the game quality, it's the narrative, it's everything else. Why not just do it that way? Why not have a guy you can parade around and you can flash, like, yeah, maybe it is a conflict of interest, but fuck you, we don't care. Like that, why not just do it that way? So I don't know. That was kind of what was going through my head as I was watching it, as I was like, yeah, the game sucks, so Brady sucked, but who cares? That's kind of what the deal's going to be.
Yeah, and I think Fox is probably ecstatic with how this went, other than the game being a blowout. I mean, even with it being a blowout, it winds up being the most highly rated Super Bowl of all time, or most watched Super Bowl of all time. And I don't think Tom Brady's responsible for that, but he clearly didn't hurt. And he might have attracted, some relatively small number of viewers, but still viewers you're attracting. He's definitely not scaring any viewers off. But it's just, going back to, like, just the game, the game was a blowout, and that's obviously not ideal for these situations, but he's also the author of the greatest comeback of all time in the NFL. So it's like, It was setting up for him to at least, like, set the scene for potentially a Chiefs comeback. And they just never even got there. They never even, like, thought to draw on that experience of Tom Brady leading a 28-3 comeback. But, I think this is, when we did the draft, my whole argument was basically Fox's argument was like, hey, if he can just reach this bare minimum standard, then his fame does the rest. And I think he's, like, at the bare minimum standard. Like, he's not going to detract from the broadcast. And if the trade-off is a couple of shitty columns from me and Andrew Marchand, then, like, Fox takes that every day of the week.
I do wonder, though, at the same time, right? Like, Fox now, they had 2 in 3 years in terms of Super Bowls. They don't have another one. They're in the regular rotation now. They don't have another one until 2029. And I was also, like, trying to kind of think, because we're going to get through some other offseason kind of questions and thoughts about the NFL now that it's out of our lives for a little while. And I was like, what do we really want from these guys? And I feel like if you think of the best ones, and not even just in the NFL, it's like the time for him to be great and remembered for this, and not just have it be, oh, and then there were those few years he did the Fox thing, like, ha ha ha. It is just the time spent. Like, it is the trust you build up with the audience. It's the reliability of, they kind of know your point of view. Over time, you kind of become like this ambassador for the game in a way that I frankly don't. I think Brady's been more combative about the NFL than embracing the league. It felt like he had a lot to get off of his chest more than it felt like he was here to, coronate anything. Like, Peyton is he's an NFL, like, he's Rob Lowe with the shield hat, right?
Very much so,
like,
yeah.
Brady doesn't feel like that. And so I don't know if he ever gets there, but to look forward, like I said, I do think, like, now that season 1 is done, if he holds to his word, we probably just won't care as much until maybe the next time they have a Super Bowl or something. And I'll be curious to see how it looks then. Does he just become somebody where it's like, oh, Tom's on the game, and it just is one of those things? Does does it fizzle? Does he just get over it? Like, I guess the next step after year one is like, does he become Uncle Tom? That's a bad one to use. Uncle Tom, that Uncle Brady, I'll go, or what? I guess I don't know. Maybe we can't know, but what do you think?
I think you're right. These guys can evolve. And that's the thing. Like nothing is set in stone. I mean, just look at what we've gone through with Tony Romo since he first got into this just in 2017. I mean, he was beloved and then he was kind of a punching bag. And now I think he's kind of back on his way up now, or at least somebody who we've kind of settled into. We don't think he's golfing the entire time anymore like we did a couple of years ago.
And Collinsworth, same thing, right? Like he has his eccentricities and you either like him or don't, but it's like, oh, Chris is on the game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I think maybe the best example is Buck and Aikman. I mean, they were kind of a polarizing booth throughout their time at Fox, and now I think as Sean Keeley at Awful Announcing coined it, Troy Aikman's kind of in his I don't give a shit era, and like we've kind of to your point, like we don't get there unless we have that built up trust and that built up relationship with these broadcasters. I guess the flip side of that would be, like, what evidence do we have that anything like that exists for Tom Brady? Like, he's kind of not a compelling personality. He kind of just makes like awkward dad jokes. He's not very funny. He tries to be funny. I think like he got a little too cute with all the Eagles stuff and Nick Foles and all that. Like some of it was good. And then like at a certain point, it's just like, all right, we get it. You're trying to be self-deprecating. And it's just, I don't know. I don't think he's found his voice in terms of like what he wants his personality to be. And right now, this just feels like an extension of I'm Tom Brady, ex-NFL quarterback, greatest quarterback of all time. And I'm also the co-owner of the Raiders and I call games. Like it just feels like a part of something Tom Brady does as opposed to like him having a real personality that's cut out for any of this.
I think that element is exactly what I think really at the core when you're just watching the game and you're, all that's happening is you're hearing him and there's a game and you're not sitting there thinking about his contract or whatever. That is, I think, what is distracting and what might be like grating for the average fan who doesn't think about it as deeply as me or you is like this feeling of why is he here?
Mm-hmm.
Like I care about this. This is my team. I'm watching. I'm dedicating my Sunday to this. This matters to me. Does it matter to him? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Whereas Troy Aikman keeps a low profile. Even though he's Troy Aikman, he's famous, he's a handsome guy, whatever. You don't hear about him unless he's on your TV. It's just Troy Aikman. It doesn't really matter to anybody, at this point. And then the other guys are even less famous than he is probably. Romo has, used to date celebrities and stuff, but he's just like a family guy now. You know what I mean? And so like it kind of, it's this other thing I've thought of. It's a bigger deal, I guess a bigger thing, but it kind of reminds me of like Dwayne Wade too, where I just wonder what these athletes, this generation of athletes that are like legit wealthy, like what are they going to do? What is like there were guys who they had to go into broadcasting. They had to go into coaching. Even somebody like Magic Johnson or Bill Walton or any of these people, like they just, okay, Magic had some investments and everything. I guess maybe not him, but there's players who went this route because Bill Russell, let's say, right? Like they had to. They needed the money. They needed a second act. They were done when they were 38 and they needed somewhere to go. Brady, Wade, any of these guys, they don't need that. Chris Paul, like they don't need to do this. So treating it as flippantly and almost like using the job, it doesn't surprise me that that's how somebody like Brady would look at it.
Yeah, it goes back to, I think, an analogy I've made on this podcast before, but you look at the best coaches and you look at the best NBA, NFL coaches, they aren't typically ex-star players. Like it's Ty Lue, it's JJ Redick, it's like guys who were role players, backups. It's not Kobe Bryant, or I'm not guessing LeBron James is going to get into coaching. And I think you do lose, like when your greatness is so overpowering, like you do lose some perspective when it comes to coaching or analyzing the game. And so like that's what made this Tom Brady thing so unprecedented. And I think what's funny about it is I was reading the comments to my column because I always read the comments, and like the biggest criticism that just like the readers and the followers had, was he talks too much about himself. Tom Brady talks too much about himself. And yet here you and I are saying, like, why isn't he talking about himself more? Why isn't he telling us what it's like to be trailing by 28 points in the Super Bowl? Like, why? Like, we want to hear more of Tom Brady's perspective. And I think it just speaks to kind of the needle he has to thread here. And I think it's a really tough one. Like, I think it's going to be really tough for him to pull this off. I think, look at the other top analysts. Tony Romo was a top level quarterback. He wasn't the best quarterback in the league, same as Troy Aikman. I think when you're the greatest of all time, and to speak to, Dwayne Wade's in a similar category in terms of the level of stardom that he achieved as a basketball player, like, yeah, I think it's really, really tough for you to explain things through a prism other than I'm Tom Brady, this is what I saw.
And when you don't need the job and the money, and feel driven to work hard at it in order to like make a living for yourself, and you have all these other things going on, and you're so available elsewhere, like this whole dynamic of him, like we've had this kind of conversation within Awful Announcing, and like we've written about it a little bit of like he should just, and I saw Andrew Marchand talked about it today too on his podcast, this like Brady would be better in the studio concept.
Yes.
Right. But I think like also that presence in all these other places, I get that argument would be that he wouldn't be in the games. But the fact that he's out at Fanatics Fest and he's doing Bryson DeChambeau's podcast and he's, has the Sirius XM thing, and he might pop up at a Raiders press conference here and there, and on and on and on. I think that also just works against him. There is no reason for him to be solely focused on this. And again, I do think that comes across to people when they're watching, is they just feel like they're being played almost in a way. They feel like they're just like part of this thing that Fox is kind of like, you'll pay attention to this. Watch yourself. You'll pay attention.
You know what else I think works against him big time? And maybe this is just like the super inside baseball part for people like you and me, but I think the Greg Olsen comparison really works against him, because Greg Olsen is one of those guys who got out of football and probably needed to go into broadcasting or needed to do something else. And so the fact that you go from this dynamic of Greg Olsen calling XFL games in the offseason when he's still an active football player and working his way up to the top booth and ultimately calling the Super Bowl for Fox. And then this guy who's become this beloved analyst just gets demoted because Tom Brady helicopters in. Like, I think that it's really hard to analyze and to write and to talk about Tom Brady, like, without addressing that. And I think it's obviously not something Fox cares about, but I think it's something that people in the media care about. And I think there's probably a portion of football fans who care about it too.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like we sort of just ended up right back where we started. If you would have asked how this would go, I think we would have probably guessed something like this, where it's somewhat of a distraction, but it's also very fascinating, interesting to think and talk about, and ultimately a little bit of a letdown in terms of like the peak of what we feel like from like an educational and understanding standpoint that we could have gotten out of somebody who is obviously brilliant at the sport. But any final thoughts on Brady? I got a stock watch to throw at you.
Yeah, we might get to this when we talk about NFL offseason stuff, but just real quick, because you hit on it, Andrew Marchand saying he'd be better in the studio. I agree with that. And I think the frustrating part for me about all of this is I just think there's such an obvious solution. And it's you put Tom Brady in the studio, you reinvent Fox NFL Sunday now that it seems like Jimmy Johnson is on his way out. Terry Bradshaw's probably not long for it. And then you put Greg Olsen back in the booth. And I just don't understand the hesitancy for anybody involved to put Tom Brady in the studio. I think it'd be better for his lifestyle. I think there's this perception that like it's less prestigious to be in the studio. Charles Barkley's like the most famous member of the sports media. Like you can be in the studio and be really, really good and still achieve this high level of fame and prestige and whatever it is that Fox and Tom Brady care about. I think you could spin it in a way where you're saying Tom wants to spend more time with his family. Tom, the booth wasn't for him, but he really like wants to be a part of a team and the camaraderie of the studio. You'd have a fun dynamic of him and Michael Strahan having formerly been rivals. I just, it's such an
And
obvious.
Gronk and Edelman seem like they're coming in soon. Yeah,
exactly. It's just such an easy solution to me and such a sensible solution to me that I don't understand why they aren't doing it.
Well, because they're paying him $38 million a year.
But I mean, put him in the, like, what's
but
the
more
difference
people
between,
watch the games. I mean, right? So that's why Aikman makes more than Ryan Clark.
Yeah, I guess, but I just don't. I mean, what's Charles Barkley make? Like Charles Barkley,
yeah,
I'm guessing makes
he's
more
the one
than
exception.
I mean, I would think Tom Brady would qualify as any sort of exception. He's already an exception in the booth. I just don't. I disagree with the notion that him calling games has more value to Fox than him being in a studio show, which might actually get. I mean, I know it's the #1 studio show, so maybe that's part of the reason why they don't care. Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I just think as you look at having to reinvent this thing moving forward, like that to me just makes sense for all parties involved.
Yeah, it feels like something that maybe like an Amazon or a Netflix would be more willing to try, whereas Fox is just this is this, that's that. We pay these people that much, these people do this, and that's sort of what it's going to be.
You know? Even then, though, you could put when you have the Super Bowl, you could just throw Brady in the booth, make it a 3-man booth. Like I just don't. I don't think there has to be any. I feel like everybody's thinking really rigidly about this. I'm talking about Fox, and I don't think it needs to be.
Well, and even then, like I say Amazon, but they were like, yeah, we'll just do like the same thing with younger guys. So
right, exactly.
I don't even know if they deserve that credit. All right, let's get to our Stock Watch, which we can get through a little quicker than normal. I just thought this was funny, Ben. It kind of came out along the Super Bowl week, which was that Josh Allen ended up winning MVP. And I just thought it was a hilarious example where Lamar Jackson getting first team All-Pro and obviously the playoffs shaking out how they did with him bowing out early again and not playing his best football come the winter, just led to this whole news cycle around Lamar winning it one more time in spite of those failures. How do we evaluate MVP? On and on and on. The whole tired debate that we knew would come, and then it did come, and then he didn't actually win MVP. And then it was just this funny, again, an example where sports media is just allowed to pretend like entire weeks of content never happened. No one has to say, oh, crap, I guess I take back my whole narrative I spun out around Lamar winning MVP because we needed something to talk about during the playoffs. Okay, never mind. Now I'll just have my Josh Allen won MVP take and just the machine keeps churning. It's funny when those things happen. There's no accountability. I mean, that sounds so serious, but there's egg on their face.
I think the funny part to me about all of it was obviously like the big line of thinking for these voters was I'm going to vote Lamar first team All-Pro and I'm going to vote Josh Allen MVP. And that's like how I'm going to settle it. And to me, like, but then the other part is I have to come out and defend why I did that. And it's like, just say what you were doing. Like, just say you wanted to reward both players. That's what was happening here. This wasn't some like hard thought out thing about what does it mean to be first team AP? What does it mean to be MVP? Like, if you wanted to do that with offensive player of the year and MVP, I would understand it a little bit more, but that was always going to Saquon Barkley. But like, just say what you were doing. Just say we live in a participation trophy society. And that's what was happening here because I've heard the rationalizations. I've yet to hear a rationalization I agreed with.
What I thought was funny is like, was there an email chain? How did everybody come to the same kind of conclusion that this is what we were doing? I mean, I know the final vote was fairly close, but it felt like a lot of people thought that. And it's not exactly like, I mean, last year, Lamar was sort of won by default because there didn't seem to be another awesome candidate. There have been some close races in the past, and it's always just interesting how, even though no one says it out loud, all the voters tend to kind of do the same thing.
Yeah.
Like Adrian Peterson's getting it this year, guys. You know what I mean? We're all doing it, you know, and and then this year it's like we're going to do the first team All-Pro and the MVP thing, follow my lead, but I'm not going to tell you to, and then it all works out.
It's funny too, because first team all AP came out, I think like 2 weeks before. And so when it came out that Lamar was first team AP, everybody was like, oh, this means he's winning MVP. And it turned out it just meant the complete opposite. So I guess like that's something we'll have to account for now moving forward if such a situation arises.
The roller coaster of NFL MVP stock was interesting. Let's get to key media questions heading into the NFL offseason. I'm just going to read you the list of changes that could be coming, and then you just tell me where you want to start, Ben, okay? Mm-hmm. So Jimmy Johnson teasing retirement on the pregame show and then backing out of it. Terry Bradshaw telling some random person at Radio Row that he wants to stay on through the next Super Bowl when he will be 80, which is 2029, although his contract doesn't go that long. Then we had Dan Orlovsky negotiating in public with ESPN on his first appearance on First Take and on X afterward. NBC is broadcasting the next Super Bowl. Anything related to their package and their coverage. We know that Netflix and Amazon are going to be in the picture once again, keeping their Christmas, Black Friday, Wild Card Weekend games that are going to be streaming exclusive. The NFL Draft media rights are up after this April's festivities. NFL has been pretty quiet about what they're thinking there. So has ESPN. We know some other bidders have gotten involved. Aaron Andrews of Fox on their top team is a free agent. And Travis Kelce, who we have not heard much of anything about his future in the NFL, but obviously their three-peat effort came up short, and he is not getting any younger. His brother, of course, works for the worldwide leader, and his future will be heavily watched, and I'm sure they very much want to get him alongside Jason. So that's 7, and those are pretty huge storylines, even though there's not the musical chairs of color commentators and everything we might be used to. But what catches your eye the most from that list?
I don't know if it's the most interesting because I tend to think he's probably going to stay put, but let's start with Orlovsky because I thought at least the way, like, he didn't even let the Super Bowl breathe. Like he kind of just went for it on First Take on Monday morning. It was like, hey guys, by the way, like my contract's up. I'm not sure when I'm going to see you guys again. What did you make of that? Because that's, I guess that's not the way I would have expected him to go about handling it in such a public manner.
I kind of would I don't know. Dan Orlovsky seems very online and very like,
oh yeah.
I guess just upfront and authentic for better or worse with his personality. So it didn't necessarily surprise me that he would put this front and center. He also did it like this the last time, basically, when it was reported that he was offered a position as an analyst at Fox, and when he came back, he did a media tour kind of saying, oh, I want to call top games on a network someday. This number 2 booth at ESPN for NFL is the best place for me to do it. I'm not doing college anymore. He doesn't really appear anywhere on their college coverage anymore where he used to. And I'm going to do this for the time being. And we're here again. So it didn't surprise me, but I also just feel like Dan Orlovsky, and this is nothing about him personally, I'm whatever, but I just feel like he doesn't really appear to be content with waiting his turn for any of the things that could be awaiting him in his career, whether that's coaching or a promotion in the NFL world. He's not 50, and he's ready for everything. And I don't know if he's going to get it.
Yeah, he's 41, I think. And I mean, he's had a pretty, for a player who, candidly didn't have much stature in the NFL, like he's had a pretty rapid rise in sports media. I tend to think he's going to stay at ESPN because I think he's kind of invaluable to what ESPN does. I mean, he's a take machine and he's a quarterback analyst and he's a guy who's like willing to come out and say the thing that's going to generate headlines and that's going to spur additional content. He can go on Get Up. He can go on First Take. Like these are valuable things.
McAfee.
McAfee. He can go on ESPN. I think they like that he has a presence. Like he can go on a variety of ESPN shows. His regular gig is NFL Live, which is like a little more serious than the morning shows are. So like, I think he's a very valued member of ESPN. I think they're going to do what it takes to keep him. But I agree with your stance. Like he wants more, and he's kind of capped out at ESPN. But the problem is he'd kind of be capped out anywhere too. Like the only one that stands out to me is I think Amazon's going to come open at some point in the next couple of years. It just seems like Al Michaels is at the end of his career. I think Kirk Herbstreit, like by now, like he has to stop being so overexposed. I think he likes
not even overexposed from a publicity standpoint, but just like run ragged. The dude just works too much. He's on airplanes half the week.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be impossible to prepare for a primetime NFL game, prepare for college game day, prepare for a college football game that night. Like it has to be hard. And so I do think Amazon's going to come open, and I think Orlovsky would be in the running for that. I don't know if he'd get it, but I think he would be at least in the running.
I mean, if Brady's still at Fox, that job is Olsen's, right? So
yeah, that's true. So yeah, and so that's another top job that's probably not available. ESPN does seem to be getting more games. I mean, I don't know how many Monday Night Football games they had this year. It seemed like half the weeks were double headers. I know it wasn't quite that much, but maybe a quarter
plus
of them.
The ESPN Plus exclusives that they now have that are, I think it's like 3 a season, something like that. Yeah.
I mean, he can jump in the Netflix booth if they keep this talent sharing agreement that seems to be happening. So I do think like those opportunities would be there, but I also understand why he would want to look elsewhere. The coaching thing is funny because it's like we're kind of past that point. Like if you were going to leave for a coaching job, you would have left a month ago. You wouldn't be leaving right now. So I that always kind of it just seems like a storyline we're going to talk about every offseason, and it's never going to happen. Maybe it will one day, but I tend to think he'll stay. But I just thought it was interesting the way he went about it.
The only spot that I look at that would maybe be somewhat of a promotion is NBC's number 2 team is technically Todd Blackledge.
Mm-hmm.
That's their analyst for that booth. It is the way that they've run it recently. Now, if they had 2, I don't know if they have 2 playoff games on one weekend next year. I always find it hard to find those details, so I could be missing something. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But like the Rio game on opening week of the season and a couple others, it was Noah Eagle and Todd Blackledge. Maybe if, especially in a season where NBC has the Super Bowl and there's a little more attention around them, Chris Collinsworth's not going anywhere, but he just signed an extension. But maybe that feels like a little bit of a promotion, especially if you just straight up replaced him and you were calling some of the Big Ten games. I believe NBC has the Big Ten championship game next year. So that could be something where you could talk yourself into, this is a little higher profile in terms of the games. Maybe you get paid a little more. You're out of the, yes, it's nice to be everywhere at ESPN. That comes with a certain level of acclaim where I just read all that list and we're talking about Dan Orlovsky first. We would not be doing that if he didn't work at ESPN, but it's also tiring and you probably work a little less if you're at NBC too. So I can see that.
Yeah, I guess it's just, I mean, he seems, at least his public disposition to all this is, I'm going to consider my options. And we're kind of guessing at like what he wants. And I think we both think it involves calling games. But like, I don't know. I feel like ESPN could make that happen. I feel like ESPN could be like, hey, you'll be in our number 2 Monday Night Football booth. We'll let you do the Netflix games if they want you. We'll loan you out. Like we'll make this work. Just keep saying Baker Mayfield is disrespected on Get Up. Like just please keep driving.
And if we have some kind of animated alt cast, you're a lock. You're in.
You and me are grandfathered in.
You let's can be go to Lilo and Stitch, whatever, the next time we do one. Yeah. What was the other one you want to go to?
Let's go to NBC because we have kind of a natural through line there since you just brought him up. And like, is the Super Bowl halftime show next year? Not the performance. Is it going to be Jason Garrett and Chris Sims? Like, is that like, they've got to level up here, right? No disrespect.
Yeah, I thought of you when I wrote our newsletter for Awful Announcing the night of the Super Bowl. I had the Monday edition and I just wrote like NBC's up next, like go bigger, guys. Yeah. Like what are we doing here, you know? And I look even at the former hosts on this show and it's just like, I mean, they had Tiki Barber at one point. They had Sterling Sharp for a year, but they've just never really gone that big. I think they've had this thing for 18 years now, and they've really let the host be the star, whether that's Bob Costas, Keith Olbermann, Dan Patrick, Mike Tirico, even, Maria Taylor is as big of a star as some of these NFL people are. So I would like to keep yelling at them to do more, but I don't exactly expect that that's going to be how they handle this. I think it's more likely that like Bob Costas comes back for something next year. I mean, maybe not since it's NFL, but then it is that they're going to suddenly have, Travis Kelce around.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, like, my first thought was if there was a network who it came out tomorrow, like breaking news, like this studio show is just overhauling. They're all the talents out, a little bit like what CBS did last year when it was like, hey, Chris Sims and Boomer are out, Matt Ryan and JJ Watt are in. And if there was a studio show that was going to undergo a facelift, like NBC to me is ripe for change. Like they really, to me, especially considering it's the most watched game each week. Like that is the premier NFL game. And for that to be like such a lackluster studio show, I don't get it. But to your point, like there is nothing in their history. There is nothing in their MO that would say that they're thinking right now, like, hey, how do we pry Dan Orlovsky from ESPN? How do we get Greg Olsen over here? How do we get this going here for the Super Bowl? It just seems like they'll be like, hey, business as usual. Come watch Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth.
It's interesting too that I think if you kind of look across a lot of their sports coverage, they tend to be a little bit I guess it's just about the games might be the best way to put it. Like, I guess the most interesting hire that I would say they've made recently, there's two on the basketball side. And we've heard nothing about their NBA studio team because I think they are probably pursuing Barkley would be my guess as to why that's happening. But they brought Aaliyah Boston from the WNBA on for all of their Big Ten coverage, women's Big Ten coverage during the Caitlin Clark mania last year. And that was interesting because we all knew she was about to be Caitlin Clark's teammate. She also was really young, very raw, had relationships with South Carolina because she went there and had a moment with Dawn Staley post-game, crying and all this stuff. But she got some interesting publicity. I think she was well regarded as being smart she's like 5 years younger than me or something. Like she's young. She's genuinely young, not even just as a broadcaster. And the personal touch of it was interesting. And then Austin Rivers, they just hired to do college basketball. To me, that's like for now until October when we do the NBA, and then we can tell everybody you're going to do NBA stuff for us too. Austin Rivers spent 1 year in college and didn't really do a whole lot, so it's not like he's some kind of expert. Also for a conference that NBC doesn't have rights to. So
I was going to say he's calling Big Ten games and he played at Duke.
Exactly. Whereas at least Michigan with Jalen Rose, they hired him too. That makes more sense. So anyway, I bring all that up to say, like, maybe you could kind of piece together that their tune is changing, especially as they try to grow Peacock and maybe see themselves as broadcasting to younger people more directly than they used to. But it just feels like we're here to tell the story of the sport, and that's that. Yep. And they're just going to go by the book. It is just weird, though. Why can't you do that with people who are more interesting? Like, Devin McCourty does a great job. I just don't really perk my ears up when he's speaking, even though he's a smart guy. It's a safety that I vaguely remember a couple times playing in some big games. It just doesn't get me going the same way. So I don't know. Let's go to the NFL draft. That was the last one that I thought was interesting because the NFL keeps teasing this idea of going digital with this. I found an article you had actually written a while ago to this effect, and the same gentleman from the NFL who's like their digital content guy or something said on Radio Row to CNBC's Alex Sherman almost a verbatim quote of what you had written up, where they're like, we're interested in the other places that this could be. But I just look at it and it's already on 3 networks between ESPN, ABC, and NFL Network with really good talent doing it, in my opinion. I mean, it's hard to say that the NFL is not online, where whenever an NFL thing is happening, it's flooding every social media platform, YouTube, whatever. I think on ESPN Plus or ESPN2, whatever it was, that was the McAfee broadcast. So actually add another one to the list, 4, with the Bill Belichick audition debut that he had. That's a little bit of a, alt cast type of thing. Like, it just feels like the NFL is being a little greedy to me here. How are you gonna put this thing in more places or have more people paying attention to it when the ratings are already similar to like an NBA Finals game? Like, what are you talking about?
Well, I'm a little confused on how they're going to approach this, because it makes sense to have a streaming component, but are they talking about taking it streaming only? Are they talking about like, hey, this thing will be on YouTube TV, but it will also be on ESPN? Like, I think it's going to stay on ESPN. That's the thing. And so I think ESPN really values it. I think they like it because it helps, build out NFL content from now through April. And so like that's a not insignificant portion of their sports calendar. And so I think ESPN really values it and wants to keep it. But are we are we talking about, hey, you could watch it on Netflix with one team or ESPN with another? Or are we talking about it going to Netflix completely altogether, or YouTube or whatever? And like, that would be kind of a watershed moment for the streaming wars, right?
Yeah, I just looked up to confirm, and the Pat McAfee draft bonanza was on ESPN Plus, YouTube, and TikTok Live last year. It's like, I don't know. I thought of like the Bleacher Report deal that they just struck. Maybe they're just kind of talking about doing some more sideshow stuff like that. I mean, I know we talked about streamers last week. I know that iShowSpeed was on the premises of the draft last year streaming. They're already kind of doing that stuff. I don't know. This one feels like maybe it's just a little bit of a negotiating ploy to say, we're looking, ESPN, get creative, come to the table with some new ideas, because we could go elsewhere, but it's probably just going to end up with ESPN paying them more, and it stays kind of in the same spot. That's my guess.
Yeah, I tend to think it will stay at ESPN, and they'll do something on top of that is like considered streaming forward and streaming focused. The only thing I would add, though, is when we did our draft with Drew Lerner a few weeks ago, I put it down for Netflix in terms of like what would be a great Netflix event. And to me, this fits the Netflix mold. And so if Netflix wanted to break the bank and take the NFL draft, like, to me, that's not out of the realm of possibility, although we haven't seen like any reporting linking them to it. And maybe that would, because right now Netflix kind of has this like nice relationship with ESPN and the NFL partners. Them taking the draft would really break that to me. And that would like kind of announce like, Netflix is here and they're here for your rights, and they're here to compete with you, instead of just kind of like taking a nibble on Christmas Day. And so I don't expect that to happen, but I do think if Netflix wanted to like further cement itself as the future of sports streaming, this is kind of right up its alley.
All right, let's quickly get to Adam Silver, open to change in the NBA. Did a little bit of a media tour of his own in response to the viewership criticism and some questions about the structure of the sport, basically. But I actually want to throw one more little thing at you before we get there, Ben. I want to first ask you a question. I brought up the Bobby Bonilla of the week a few weeks back, which was the move of Kyle Hamilton to safety in week 11 for the Ravens. It was the overused piece of analysis that you could not get away from as everyone was prepping and previewing Baltimore's postseason run. Can we call this the Kyle Hamilton of the week? Can we decide in real time now that that's an okay name for it? Okay.
I think that actually fits it better than Bobby Bonilla. So yes.
Agreed. It's more in the spirit of what I'm going for. So now that it'll be the honorary Kyle Hamilton. Okay. This week's is that the Philadelphia Eagles only rushed 4 throughout the entirety of the game, and Patrick Mahomes was sacked more times than he ever had been throughout the whole season. That is the first thing out of everybody's mouth this week when they are asked to review and analyze what happened in the Super Bowl.
It's funny too, because as a longtime Dan Le Batard show listener, I'm sure you've heard the famous clip of when the Super Bowl was in Minneapolis. It was the 28-3 Super Bowl with the Patriots and the Falcons. And I think that was it. But the analysis, they did this bit where Mina Kimes was on a roller coaster giving analysis. And her analysis was that the Falcons had to get pressure on Tom Brady by rushing 4. And so, like, as it turns out, that's like really key to success in the NFL is only being able to rush 4 and not have to gimmick up your coverage. So, yeah, but
as we learned with the aforementioned Michael Strahan and Tom Brady in 2008, right? That was
exactly
the original lesson there. But yeah, I just thought it was hilarious. It's like, yes, that happened. We all saw it, and maybe that is the extent of what we need to know about how badly the Philadelphia Eagles were able to dominate that game. But it's just funny when you consume as much content as I think us and a lot of our listeners do, and that is the end-all be-all you keep getting to every single episode of anything. All right, finally, Adam Silver. I just thought this was interesting, Ben. We've been kind of tracking the NBA criticisms and pushback and the give and take on that. Christmas Day evened out the viewership. The ratings dip is a little bit overstated, but at the same time, it, like everything outside of the NFL and this most recent World Series, is basically, arrowed down in terms of consumption on television. Now, they signed this new deal where they're going to be on streaming and everything else, but I appreciate that Adam Silver is going on everything from, Shaquille O'Neal's podcast to the Pat McAfee show to the Dan Patrick show to obviously confronting questions at press conferences where he's not hiding from the criticisms. He's talking about the need to make the game physical. He's talking about coaches and analytics people in front offices, bending the game away from what a player is naturally great at. And he's being really specific and engaging with what I think the average fan might be weary of or skeptical about when it comes to the modern NBA. So I just look at it and I feel like this media deal is kind of now a cushion for the league. And I think the next 11 years until it's over, or 9, 10 until they have to start thinking about it. Am I overly optimistic based on Silver speaking this way to think that we could see some rule changes during this cushion, this period of time now where they have the money that they know is coming in and they can get to work here?
No, I think that's a great point. I think, to take it to pro wrestling, as I am wont to do, they're in a similar boat where their money is locked in, their money is guaranteed. And so I listen to these podcasts breaking down the booking and breaking down the decisions they make. And Dave Meltzer, like the preeminent pro wrestling reporter, he keeps saying, like, it doesn't matter. The money's locked in. It doesn't matter who's in the main event. It doesn't matter. Like, from a business standpoint, they have a cushion for a decade. And I think the NBA is in a similar boat. I think it's encouraging that they're willing to look at things like quarter length. And I mean, I would imagine this could lead to some more significant changes. Do you think like a 4-point line is out of the realm of possibility, or stretching the 3-point line back? Like I'd be curious to see how far he'd be willing to take it. But and I don't, that's not, I mean, 3-point shooting's not my chief complaint right now with the NBA, but it's definitely encouraging. I think that's probably a great way for both us and the NBA to look at it, is like, what can we do over the course of this rights deal that sets us up for our next rights deal? Because that's ultimately what matters.
I mean, MLB kind of did that, right? Like, they're coming up against negotiations. They were in a bleaker spot at the beginning of this rights deal than the NBA is in now, of course. But, while they had the floor that they wanted money-wise, they got to work. And I think that probably preserved and maybe gave them the strength that they have to now tell ESPN, they're kind of in a little bit of hardball right now themselves. But the MLB is, I think, understandably, operating from a little bit more of a position of strength. So I hope that the NBA can be in that boat. I think as far as the actual changes, the 10-minute quarter thing kind of made me feel, it felt like a little bit of a cop-out where it's like, you should shorten the season, but if you shorten games, then you can kind of tell people you're doing the thing that they are asking for. You can tell the players, I guess. I think fans are still they don't want to watch 82 10-minute quarter games any more than they want to watch 82 12-minute quarter games, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean,
that's my issue, though.
Changes.
That's my issue with the league right now is how do you make the regular season matter? And how do you make it matter in a way where, I mean, there's a multitude of things that go into it, but like Luka gets traded. I know he was injured, but like, and then it takes a week and a half for him to actually play for the Lakers. Or I follow the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Both players in that trade were injured.
Right. Well,
yeah.
One of them goes without saying, it seems like. But like the Cleveland Cavaliers are in the midst of this great season. Darius Garland has this incredible game against the Miami Heat and then sits out the next night against the Atlanta Hawks. And like, I know that's the smart thing to do. I know that's the scientific thing to do. I know all that. But like, to me, like, if the players are telling me these games don't actually matter and the teams are telling me these games don't actually matter, like, why should I care on a nightly basis about this product? That's where I, like, as we've talked about this, that's where I've come down, is I just don't feel like regular season games matter.
Agreed. It's the same thing we see. I think the comparison that I always try to use instead of baseball, which everybody's like, well, there's 162 and they're not doing anything about it. That's apples to oranges to me. But soccer to me is the more apt comparison, where the fundamental way that the sport is played has gotten so much more athletic and space-based that these dudes are doing things physically that they've never been asked to do before, right? Like the amount of change of direction, the amount of, if like the 3-point line, we can talk about it of, oh, it's boring to watch. Guys weren't having to cover as much distance on a defensive possession as they used to, right? Like these things matter. And so I think it's not just like, get out there and play. It's like, well, what the guys in the 80s were asked to do was less intense than what these players are asked to do. I know that, Charles Barkley would never have me say that, but I do believe it. And so, yeah, it's hard to get around the shortening of the season. Especially because like Adam Silver likes to talk about, oh, we need more. When he critiques the media, it's always like, we need more people to educate the fan. We need more NFL-like coverage. It's like, if JJ Redick had stayed in media, that I can understand a game, but then when Joel Embiid is ruled out 2 minutes before halftime, I don't.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't matter what awesome scheme was about to happen because the best player is not on the court. So I hate to be, in part of that chorus, but I think that it's impossible to ignore that reality about the NBA right now, even if you love the sport or you're, more pro NBA than like some of the loudest voices in media are. It's just true. We're just at that point.
Well, and so I think that would be the concern, is like Adam Silver's saying the right things, but is he willing to like actually address like what is like a major issue for the league? And it seems like that comes down to like the core of it, is the season is too long, and yet they're never going to shorten the season because there's too much money involved. And so like, you can try all these gimmicks, and I don't mean gimmicks like necessarily disparagingly, but like you can try different things. I think that's great. But like, if none of it is going to if you're never willing to address what we think is the core issue, then like it might be like the All-Star game, right? Like you might tinker with it and it might be a temporary fix. And then in 2 years, you might be looking for a new fix for how do we fix this, when the core issue is just like, hey, players don't want to play in an extra game that truly doesn't matter.
Well, we have Kevin Hart emceeing the All-Star game, Ben. So
I hate it.
We have that to look forward to. We have an on-court host of the All-Star game. That's where we've landed in terms of solutions to that particular problem.
You're never going to fix it. It's just at its core, it's an exhibition that doesn't matter. And I just let the East play the West. Let me buy a Donovan Mitchell jersey that I'm going to wear once and then never wear again. And like, just sell a bunch of merch that will actually be cooler as throwback merch 20 years from now. And just like, I'm so over fixing the All-Star games. Like it doesn't matter.
What's hilarious to me, and I did John Oran pointed this out in a newsletter recently, is that the NFL All-Star game is just widely understood to be a joke of a product, and they never get any real flack for it. We just kind of ignored it at this, it's almost like because the bar started so low for them, no one cared when it dropped further, whereas the NBA, we all used to like the All-Star game, and now it sucks, so we complain about it, but the NFL gets off scot-free. All right, let's get to our hot mics to close things out. Something that caught our attention, we liked, we disliked, or we just want to talk about from the week of sports media. Ben, kick us off.
Yeah, I'm going to go with something you wrote, actually, a couple of I think it was last week or the week before, but really well written piece, even better edited, a piece on how I edited it. A piece on how the Dallas Cowboys used to rule the NFL media, the ex-Dallas Cowboys players, and now it's turning into the ex-Patriots who are overfilling the media. And obviously, we talked about Tom Brady, reference Gronk, Julian Edelman, Teddy Bruschi, Damian Woody. There's just like a plethora of ex-Patriots that are flooding the media. And so it was one of those pieces when I got it to edit. Like I was jealous that you came up with that concept because I thought it was a really great concept. What kind of did you take away from writing it?
Well, there's the numbers game of it, right? Just the fact that the Patriots are everywhere all of a sudden. And then I think there's the more interesting part of it to me, which is that what that means. And I wouldn't have expected, I guess, during the Patriots dynasty, if you would have asked me, are we going to get there? A lot of these names I might not have thought of. I mean, the McCourties we already talked about, right? Like, I mean, Teddy Bruschi's been around a while now in the media, but he's kind of a Rob Ninkovich. Like these guys have kind of just popped up, and it's almost like it definitely is a product of their proximity to the greatness of that team. And the byproduct of that is when you consume the stuff, it's smart, it's football forward, but it couldn't be further from the Cowboys in terms of like flavor, right? Like we are talking about people, like I say in the piece, whose nicknames were Primetime and Playmaker. Like that was the Cowboys. And now it's like, you got to get a good night's sleep on the Friday because the Saturday walkthrough is important. And it's like, all right, dude, like you tell me, but I'm not exactly fired up or ready to hear more. There's nothing salacious going on with this crop of analysts. So I'm curious looking at it from a, like we talked about with Fox standpoint, Gronk and Edelman and people like that. It's like, what will that mean? What will that look like if they're the guys who we're just hearing from on a weekly basis going forward for the next 10, 15, 20? I mean, heck, with Jimmy Johnson, 30 years.
Yeah. And I think it has actual staying power because the Patriots actually had like kind of two dynasties. And so you had the early 2000s one, and then you had the late 2000s. Yeah, the late 2010s one. And it's kind of like you get that mix of like I don't think Gronk ever played with Bruschi, but there's also like an overlap within like the stories they're able to tell, but also the audiences that they're able to reach. And so I thought that was interesting. And obviously a part of it is kind of looking forward to like, are we going to have a Chiefs media run here? Like, are we, I think obviously we'll probably see Mahomes and Travis Kelce. You and I were talking offline about like Chris Jones seems like he'd be great at the media, but then you have kind of the side, or the role players like Juju Smith-Schuster, who I think, you could definitely see in the media one day. And I think that's like, I think obviously if you're a part of a dynasty, it puts you in the spotlight more and it gives you more opportunities. But now as we're entering this era where players are like effectively already a part of the media during their playing careers, I think it's really going to be interesting to see like how all of this takes form moving forward.
Yeah, as far as the Chiefs go, I told you before, I'm like, there's some guys you could put in a couple different categories that are already out there. Chase Daniel, Tony Gonzalez. I think I might have categorized, you could go Falcons or Chiefs there. Mitchell Schwartz you brought up, but Alex Smith is another one, and he's now on ESPN in the mornings. And I heard Tony Kornheiser raving about having him as a Pardon the Interruption guest. So I think Alex Smith is kind of out there already now too, preaching the Andy Reid way or whatever. But yeah,
isn't that kind of funny though that he was probably so pissed off when the Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes, and it wound up probably being like the best thing for him in terms of his media career. Cause like nobody would have cared that he played for Andy Reid if not for them going on this dynasty, like as soon as they traded him to Washington.
Obviously Alex Smith had a long career and the comeback is its own story from the injury, but his two most prominent things are getting replaced by Kaepernick and getting replaced by Mahomes. That's kind of a brutal reputation to have. I'm sure he hears about it in the comments of whatever he does. But I thought it was interesting. And then the other one that was funny in it is the Jets have 9. They were actually second. They've risen beyond the Cowboys themselves with even less earned, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, who are these guys? Not to be rude, but come on. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. It's also a lot of guys on the Jets who like, did something elsewhere and then got their paycheck from the Jets. Not a whole lot of homegrown talent there, I'd say.
Yeah, you pass through New York, it helps you out. I mean, plenty of these guys are good in the media, but it's just the names don't pop like they do elsewhere. It's funny to see. All right. My hot mic is the Unrivaled one-on-one tournament. I will just say I'm curious to check in on Unrivaled viewership week by week. I have a feeling it will go down. I think that the debut of it was much more publicized than anything since. The internal attendance, if you watch it, it's an odd decision to do it in such a small venue. It's like a high school gym sized thing, and the TV spectacle is much more of the point. So I'll be curious about the finances. But watching a one-on-one tournament, this started on Monday night, it's continuing Tuesday and I believe Wednesday, on TV is just kind of cool. It was the thing I was most intrigued by about this whole women's basketball league that they started when it first came out, was like a lot of the absolute best players, minus Asia Wilson and Caitlin Clark, just like pickup style, first to 11, close camera angle, one-on-one, half-court basketball. It's just kind of, you never see real like high-level athletes doing that except for, the off-season training stuff and whatnot. Yeah. And I will say it was, it felt half-baked, unfortunately, for me. They had this weird thing where they would have the player who won go put their little sticker up on the bracket, like a jumbo bracket. The players, you could tell, no one told them they were going to have to do that. So they're, wandering around. One-on-one is also incredibly tiring. I mean, it's nonstop. And then they would have these players get interviewed, and they're, like I gave it my all. They have nothing to say. And then, like the All-Star game, it had a host. So Grady Diaz, who's been all over in terms of women's basketball. I think she worked for TNT Sports for a while. She is like talking the audience through it all kind of in real time. It's just another one of these experiments of TV first, digital first. We're saying all the right stuff, and then you watch it and you're like, this product just doesn't live up to watching a NBA or WNBA broadcast. Like, there's just another element of it when there's a crowd and a great production crew and a million camera angles and all that stuff, where it's like, maybe this, I don't know. Maybe I'm old. Maybe I'm even too old to appreciate some of this stuff, but like,
are you talking strictly about the one-on-one tournament or Unrivaled in general?
The one-on-one tournament. The game broadcasts are pretty similar. I mean, TNT has the rights. They're running it pretty straightforwardly. There's a score bug. There's 3 announcers. They're doing the thing, and they actually have pretty good announcers in terms of talent. But this one-on-one thing, it's like, it feels like it should be on YouTube.
Yeah,
it's just awkward.
I also feel like the move when you're tired in one-on-one is to just like heave a long shot, heave a 3. Is there a lot of that? It's like,
there is
hey,
a lot of that.
I'm going to try to steal a couple of points here, get some. Does it make it take it rules?
It is make it take it. It's also 3s and 2s instead of 2s and 1s, which it's like you get to 11 really fast.
Yeah.
But these players are, you could tell they're not, they're not doing a lot of one-on-one themselves either. So it's like the first game was 8-0 immediately. And then it finished like 11-9 because the first scorer just got
went on a run,
exhausted.
Yeah.
So
who's like the betting favorite to win it?
That is a good question. I don't know if there's odds for something as deep as Unrivaled.
Well, I
you would
just
be able
to
find it as much as I would.
Is there anyone
Probably
who
Brianna
stood
Stewart?
Yeah. So it's like the high level players. It's like
it's basically everybody who participated in the league is doing the one-on-one tournament.
Yeah. It's not the dunk contest of Unrivaled.
No, it's everybody. So it's cool. It's fun to watch it. But as far as, a broadcast, our producer Phil found odds. Brianna Stewart plus 450.
Ooh. Well, plus money action.
Yeah. Big
some good
plus
value
for the
there.
favorite. So not to knock them. It's a cool concept. I'm sure they'll continue to polish it. They have a multi-year deal with TNT. I'm not trying to say that it's, scrap it, but at the same time, I was hoping for a little more. And I think in general, the arena, if you watch, which I do want to do a check-in on this in TGL. We've been talking about it for a while, maybe with Drew. It'd be cool to just talk about these kind of single site, digital first broadcasts, because it just feels so small to me. It feels like what we were watching during COVID, some of the stuff that they were trying.
Yeah. Oh man. Good times.
So, yeah, exactly. Korean baseball at 2 a.m. and all that.
Oh God.
All right. That'll wrap us up. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. We're here for you every single week on the play-by-play. We're also at awfulannouncing.com, minute-by-minute coverage of all things sports media and across all social media platforms. We'll catch you next week.